Hello and welcome to Earthquake Tips. With the recurrence of earthquakes in our country at a regular intervals, inflicting huge loss of lives and properties, it is obligatory on part of professionals to understand the concepts of earthquake engineering, decipher the misconceptions, and implement measures in design and construction of any new structure. With this in mind, IIT Kanpur, in association with BMTPC, started writing 32 earthquake tips covering most relevant topics which can at least help spread awareness and disseminate technical know-how amongst engineers and architects. The tips are developed by Professor CVR Murthy under the overall guidance of Professor Sudhir Kumar Jain and input from various national and international experts. The tips have been very popular and available in soft and hard form and also in various local languages. Nevertheless, BMTPC thought that for better penetration and outreach, let's convert them into video lectures and put them on social media platforms such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Accordingly, I, Shailesh Kumar Agarwal, Executive Director of BMTPC, present you these 32 tips with my voiceover. Let me first introduce these tips to you, but before that, look at this map and remember it for your lifetime. This is seismic or earthquake zoning map of our country published by Bureau of Indian Standard, and it is mandatory or must on our part to look at the seismic zone of the place and incorporate design and construction measures as per zoning for the facilities we are developing at that particular location. India, as you can see, is divided into four zones, and Zone 5 is the highest damage risk zone, whereas Zone 2 is the lowest seismic risk zone. As per BMTPC Vulnerability Atlas of India, more than 50%, to be specific, 56.8% area falls in seismic zone 3, 4, and 5, and therefore any structure we build in these zones must consider earthquake resistant aspects right from the planning stage of the project or facility. The earthquake tip 32 being explained to you are as follows. The tip number 1 is about the causes of earthquake, which is mainly attributed to plate tectonics theory. The tip number 2 explains you that earthquake travels in form of seismic waves, which gets amplified or attenuated depending upon the soil strata they are traveling through. Earthquake tip number 3 is associated with various terminologies we are often confused with, such as magnitude, intensity, focus, epicenter, etc. The fourth tip contains information on seismic zones of the country and how it is evolved. Tip number 5 tells you about the how earthquake shaking is converted into lateral earthquake force equivalent to inertia force and how it is different than the classical vertical or gravity load design. The tip number 6 is about the shape, plan, elevation, and other architectural features which may help in better seismic resistance. The tip number 7 introduces other effects of earthquakes, that is twisting, which induces more damage to the building if not taken care of. The tip number 8 introduces the philosophy of seismic design. That means the buildings are designed to suffer damage depending upon the intensity of shaking, but there should not be any collapse leading to loss of life. The tip number 9 deliberates on ductility, which means that any load carrying member deforms sufficiently before breaking, and it is one of the most important parameter for earthquake resistant design. The tip number 10 talks about stiffness and flexibility and introduces time period, frequency, and other parameters which are useful for earthquake resistant design. The tip number 11 is on seismic codes, Indian seismic codes, namely 1893, 4326, 13827, 13828, 13930, 13935, and 15988 and National Building Code. These codes need to be followed religiously for earthquake resistant design and construction. Tip number 12 to tip number 15 discuss in detail about the behavior of masonry buildings and their earthquake resistant measures. Brick masonry buildings are one of the most prevalent construction technique in our country. The tip number 16 is devoted to stone masonry buildings and how to make them earthquake resistant by simply following prescriptive guidelines in various Indian standards. There have been instances where stone masonry buildings suffered heavy damages in past earthquakes. The tip number 17 to 20 present earthquake behavior of RCC frame construction and how it is important to design and detail each structural member, that is beams, columns, and joints. The tip number 21 to 23 throw light on some of the construction practices such as open ground story, short columns, and shear walls, which are increasingly become common in urban India, and how to tackle them for better earthquake performance. The tip number 24 talks on mitigation techniques such as base isolation, seismic dampers, which help in reducing the earthquake forces on the building. In earthquake parlance, it is very important to have clear and simple load carrying paths of loads to structural system to the soil underneath. This is called load path and explained in tip number 25 and tip number 26. The tip number 27 is on non-structural elements such as furniture, almirahs, cladding, water tanks, cables, ducts, elevators, and their performance during earthquakes. In India, isolated buildings are normally constructed as unreinforced masonry, which suffer damage during earthquakes, and therefore it is necessary to reinforce the masonry buildings. Earthquake tip number 28 and 29 are on confined masonry construction and earthquake resistant techniques for masonry buildings. Foundations are often ignored for their earthquake performance, and therefore tip number 30 and 31 are dedicated to foundations and ground effects due to earthquakes. The last tip, that is earthquake tip number 32, is on quality control and quality assurance, which is most important for any construction. If quality is not up to the standard and is not ensured during construction, any robust design will perform poorly. Therefore, quality is critical for ensuring safety of buildings and its occupants. It took me more than 2 months to create these audio-visual tips. You can go through these tips one by one on BMTPC YouTube channel. I expect that you all will like them and have faith that you will try to implement the concepts, principles, and procedures, including guidelines explained through these tips, and help create earthquake resilient buildings and infrastructure. Thank you and Jai Hind.